The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 111. Excuse me, Yenica 3. The eastern Spartus region of Huang Island, which takes 3 days and nights of horseback riding to reach, is an area where livestock farming is widely developed. 4/10 of the livestock products that circulate within the Chloral Empire are produced right in the Spartus region, and the famous land of livestock Fulon is actually a term for the southern mountainous region of Spartus. If you delve deep into the valleys of Fulon and scan the ridges, you'll find a small village called Torin, with a population of barely 300. Despite its tiny size, the amount of livestock products the village produces is truly impressive in comparison to its size. It's sufficient to support a small city. Half of the village's population is involved in the livestock industry, while the other half works in the processing of livestock products, a small livestock village nestled in the valleys. On the outskirts is a decent-sized ranch, the Failover Ranch, passed down through 4 generations. The only daughter of this ranch, indeed, is the pride of the village, a girl named Yenica Failover. From the moment she could babble, Yenica began to see spirits, marking her as a prodigy who would surely shine in the village's future. A livestock village secluded in the mountains. As the residents grappled with an aging population and diminishing communication with young people who yearned for the city, the village remained either peaceful and quiet or, to speak unfavorably, static and monotonous. In such a closed world, it was clear how Yenica with her exceptional talents spent her childhood, inevitably monopolizing everyone's love. Showered with affection, she grew up without a single rough edge, a lovely personality. Carrying a basket full of eggs with a tiny elemental spirit and sharing fresh food with neighbors on the village square. Vivid memories of friendly greetings exchanged while dartingly across the fence lines stayed fresh in Yenica's mind. Above, a few lazy clouds drifted by. The view of the mountain range, covered in lush green foliage, was always a sight to behold. Visitors to the village were rare, perhaps a traveling merchant negotiating prices, laborers handling logistics, or maybe a postman. Growing up in such a setting for over a decade meant familiar faces were all one could expect to see, neighbors like Mr. Duran, Miss Lethe across the way, Mr. Arun by the square, and the village chief, Mr. Alcus. To Yenica, they were all elders since she was just going through childhood. True to a stagnant mountain village, the birth rate was dismal. Yenica spent nearly her whole life as the darling youngest of the village. Consequently, she never experienced the formality of being addressed with honorifics. Now in her 3rd year since leaving for Sylvania Academy, while she should have become accustomed to it, a lot still felt foreign to her, including being treated courteously. It took nearly 6 months to get comfortable with the way the maids at Ophelius Hall treated her. "Excuse me, Miss Yenica." Suddenly, Yenica was snapped out of her reverie by an academic staff member calling her name in the administrative consultation room of Tris Hall. "You've come again today. I'm not sure how many days in a row this is. If there's anything you want to consult or apply for, please just tell us. We can process it quickly if it's an administrative matter." "Ah, well, you see," Yenica hesitated in front of the polite staff member, wondering whether to submit the document in her sleeve, but then firmly shook her head. The academic staff member sighed deeply, nodded in understanding, and suggested, "Whatever it is that's troubling you, if it becomes too much, consider consulting with others, Miss Yenica. There are many people within the academy who would be happy to help you." Haha, it's just that the problem is a bit too difficult to discuss with others," Yenica mumbled before hastily exiting the consultation room. Then, sighing deeply as she unfolded the document she'd reconsidered submitting, she lamented, "Why do unpleasant thoughts always manage to squeeze through whenever there's a gap?" She paused, gathering her thoughts once more. Considering her current contented and happy experience at the academy, her courses were manageable, she always had a warm time with her friends, there were many who admired her, the dormitory facilities were quite satisfactory, and she even spent all day with the boy she had a crush on. Even though they had a little quarrel this morning, it was just a small incident. Her daily life held no reason for her lips to frown. How many could be living such a satisfactory academic life? To complain any further would be like the rich asking for more, inviting criticism. However, the problems that arose from Yenica's kind and sincere nature remained unsolved, occasionally causing an odd pain in her heart. After reading the document she had written, she sighed again and resolutely tossed it into a nearby garbage can. The nearly full trash can received the sliding document on its summit. It was an application form for leaving the dormitory, Dex Hall. She soon reconsidered, retrieving the paper from the trash and once again falling into contemplation, a familiar indecision taking hold. She knew not the weight of every expectant, admiring, considerate, respectful gaze that pressed upon her shoulders. The mere thought of running away due to such burdens was difficult, since running away consists of distancing oneself from something hard, hateful, or disagreeable. Could she ever consider the expectations and gazes of the friends, staff, and roommates at Dex Hall as mere burdens? Yet, Yenica knew. It hadn't been quite a year since she moved from the private rooms of Ophelius Hall to the shared rooms of Dex Hall, and the only place where Yenica could truly relax and be at ease during that time was, inevitably, Ed's camp. Isn't it moving? Around this time last year, even if I was watching you from right next to you, you wouldn't notice, but now you can summon me in this imperfect form and share a conversation. Doesn't our contract make things quite special? Closing square bracket. Quote ellipsis ellipsis dot quote. Of course, it's not like we can't communicate without a contract. You're acting so nonchalantly, Ed, but do you realize how significant it is to be able to handle a high-level spirit? The power players of this academy, Zix, Wade, Clevius, none of them would be a match for me if I could only unleash my full power. The problem is that I can't fully manifest that power. Closing square bracket. That means, obviously it would take you a really long time to reach such a level. You can't compare yourself to an exception like Yenica. Still, if you keep training, your sensitivity will improve and you'll be able to handle me better. Is that too far in the future? Regardless, what does it matter? We're not just acquaintances for a short while. Closing square bracket. On leaving the Northern Woods' camp and walking towards the academy, you come across a small lake with Merelda's guardian tree, set grandly upon the grassy isle in its center, where naturally occurring magic congregates most, and one of Yenica's main sites for practicing spirit magic. There's no better place than this for imperfectly summoning Merelda. Adorned in a thin-strapped pure white dress, the figure of a silver-haired girl appears almost human, yet she is not. I summoned Merelda, at the cost of an excessive amount of magic, because of the conversation we had yesterday. The higher the understanding with a high-level spirit, the more significant the impact on my future combat capabilities, it was assured. I agreed with that sentiment. Ultimately, understanding as a stat revolves around how often you accompany them, use them in battle, manifest them, and engage in dialogue, but when manifesting in human form like this, it nearly consumes all my magic power, putting me in a slightly tricky position. It's somewhat convenient when they prattle away on their own. Yenica thinks there's no greater chatterbox in the world. Now I realize just how accurate Yenica's assessment was. So, what about you and Yenica? Is the back and forth of awkward respectful language and mutual respect still ongoing? Closing square bracket. You've seen it all. What's your intention behind such a question? I don't have the leisure to follow around to classes. I'm just curious if anything happened during the lessons. Sitting near the roots of the guardian tree, Merelda swung her legs and asked with curiosity, not needing to lie about anything, so I decided to relay exactly the incident that had occurred with Yenica that morning. As always, when I greeted Yenica early in the morning at the faculty building, she clutched her oak wand, startled, and stepped back. Clearly, the aftermath of yesterday's incident lingered. It felt like an unnecessary event had created an uncomfortable atmosphere between us. So, I explained that Yenica didn't know what to say next and, turning red, avoided my gaze before quickly fleeing after a greeting. During all this, the formal language continued non-stop. At first, I didn't think much of it, but now I'm starting to wonder if she's harboring something inside, or if some inherent stress is manifesting in an odd way. Oh, are you worried about Yenica? Of course I am. Rather enthusiastic, Merelda kept swinging her legs and nodding, then asked me with a full-faced smile. It did feel a bit uneasy to leave things as they are, right? You should do something. That's why I'm asking, is it okay if I take a couple of branches from this tree? The tree. So suddenly. Merylda's guardian tree, where she and I are seated, is an old tree that has lived for over a millennium. The older the tree, the more it can gently absorb and emit magic. This guardian tree is a prime material for magical artifacts, coveted second to none. If lightning magic is added, it can serve as the perfect component for a lightning-struck thousand-year tree staff. Compared to the old oak staff Yenica carries, this will certainly be several degrees more effective and convenient. I succinctly summarized this to Merylda, and when she responded with, I see, but strictly speaking, there's no need to get my permission. Isn't this your tree? It's even called Merylda's guardian tree. Well, that's a bit. It was a persistent problem. An old friend I met long ago simply attached my name to this tree. Although I claim to be this forest's master, I don't really bother managing every little thing, like breaking off a branch. Do as you please. An old friend, well, considering your long life, you must have had many connections. Merylda flounced in her white dress, hopping around the tree before eventually returning to my side. Then, she shook her shoulders and struck a deliberately enchanting pose. I take the form of a human, as you see. I told you it's not easy, right? What do you think makes this possible? How can it be possible? Did you learn some related magic? It's a bit different. High-level spirits can change into various forms, but the most important thing is how familiar and comfortable they are, or how well they can imitate. It's very hard to shape-shift into something that doesn't exist at all. That's also why most spirits take on animal forms. They are the easiest forms you can find in nature. She then gave a sly smile, lifting her dress up to her shins and slightly bowing her head in greeting. It was an imperial courtesy. Just looking at her like this, she seemed no different from a real person. That's why, to imitate a human form, I needed a reference point. Since I've made a contract with you, Ed, I've taken in your inner psychology and transformed into the girl closest to your ideal type. What? How does it feel? You can't fake inner psychology, so when you look at me like this, doesn't your heart throb unconsciously? The girl of your ideal type is right before your eyes. I looked at Merylda, who was making a fuss, seemingly taken back by her words. My taste was like this. It's certainly unexpected. Of course, it's unexpected. Because it's a lie. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Are you kidding me? With that question implied in my gaze, Merylda twirled the hem of her dress with a spirited laugh that echoed, Kyahaha. It was as if she was a girl who had just bought a new dress and was happily showing it off. There's no way I could read and imitate inner psychology. Actually, I copy the appearance of a person I met who was most special and peculiar. Like this, someone who didn't dress up too extravagantly, and was always carefree. That person also gave my tree its name. Once again, I saw Merylda in human form. The disparity with the giant wolf that was rampaging with the intent to shatter everything was so great, it was honest to difficult to acclimate to. Who are you? When I asked, Merylda didn't answer right away. She just gave a meaningful smile. I have lived a long time. I've been around to even see the rise and fall of Sylvania Academy as something endearing. Though now, the Akan Isles and Sylvania Academy feel like one inseparable body, in the distant past I lived in, this place was nothing but an uninhabited island, without even an academy. Merylda undid the hair that had been tied back like a tail. When her abundant locks of hair unraveled, her image seemed to change. Then I caught my breath. That face seemed oddly familiar, a spitting image that I had seen countless times in the historical books of magic. How about it? The one who infused magical power into the guardian tree and made it the source of power. The one who established this school. The one who asked Merylda to protect this forest for so long. Indeed, could it all have been connected this way? Since it wasn't a part of what I knew, it wasn't highlighted in that Sylvania's failed swordsman scenario. The girl before me was Merylda's imperfect manifestation. When I thought about who she resembled, I was now sure. The magician and scholar who was stronger and more knowledgeable than anyone else in the distant past. She bore the image of the great sage, Sylvania. His Majesty, the Saint King, is visiting. The location was the Student Council room, attached to Obel Hall near the Student Union building. It had been roughly 5 days since Tanya Rothtaylor had sat down in the position of Student Council President and started handling proper work. It was still an adaptation period, but such an important position doesn't afford the luxury of time to adapt well. Among the reports received from the Student Council Secretary, the most conspicuous and critically checked part was the visit of the man sitting at the top of the Telos order, Saint King Eldane, ruler of Saint City Carpea, and his aide, Archbishop Verju. A visit from a bishop-level clergy warranted enough preparation, but the news of two big shots from Saint City visiting the remote Akan Isles at once was enough to cause a headache just to think about. The purpose of the visit is. Tanya skimmed through the documents. She was fairly confident in her speed reading. Even listed as a visit purpose, there was nothing special. To widely spread the grace of Lord Telos, to welcome new converts to baptism, and to give a sermon on the podium before leaving. But these were likely just superficial reasons. The endlessly noble Saint King from the Telos order coming all the way to this remote Akan Isle, it would surely all be about the precious Saint Clarice. Saint Clarice could be considered the heart of the Telos order. Even the craving for learning couldn't escape the embrace of divine love, leading her to the land of learning, Sylvania, early this semester. Most likely, the Saint King wanted to see with his own eyes. Whether Saint Clarice was receiving proper treatment, whether the facilities were adequate, whether there were any dangers. If there were any disqualifying reasons, they might be considering taking Clarice back with them. It was a truly regrettable situation, but with the recent never-ending incidents at Sylvania, it wouldn't be strange if there were a few disqualifying reasons. After finishing today's work, I'll have to schedule a visit to see the saint residing in Ophelius Hall. Secretary Ilina, are you fine with that? Yes. I'll inquire with the escort personnel about it. And the student council secretary began to pull out yet more documents. There was still a ton left. Oh, right. The people from Saint City have asked for a private meeting with a student. Shall I pass it to the academic side? Or would you like to check? A private meeting. Who do they even want to meet that the Saint King himself would be interested in meeting, other than the saint? Yes. They're a second-year student. Adele series from the magic department. Adele, I've heard of that senior. Yes, they're quite a unique individual, hard to predict when or where they might appear. Tanya stroked her chin for a moment in contemplation. Well, if they've requested it, there's no reason to say no. The very timing of the Saint King's people visiting Akan Isle wasn't exactly pleasant. Crackle, crackle, floosh. And so, it turned out I met Yenica again late into the night. Geesh, we practically short-circuited just from exchanging polite words, spending almost a whole day recovering from the emotional overload. Late at night in the camp. I was sitting by the campfire, memorizing basic magic formulas while also peeling an apple with a folding knife. Now I could afford to be choosy about nutrients when eating, making sure to get a variety of foods, even remembering to have fruit after meals. It was a real sign that life had gotten much more stable. As I swung my leg leisurely and tapped the apple twice with the knife, that's when Yenica emerged from the undergrowth. I paused in peeling the apple and looked over at Yenica. Wondering what to say first, I just waited quietly. Hi, hello, quote ellipsis quote, hello, or hi, hello. She was still malfunctioning. How embarrassed had she been? I was apprehensive about starting the conversation, so I just nodded slowly. The awkwardness was mutual. We silently observed each other for a few seconds before eventually Yenica, blushing, approached meekly and sat carefully on the rock by the fire. I showed her the half-peeled apple and asked, "Do you want an apple? Or, would you like an apple?" Yes, quote ellipsis quote. The knife continued in its trajectory. The sound of apple peel being carved off filled the air for a moment. Plate, please. Yes, here you go. Couldn't we just stick to one form of address, either using honorifics or not? It'd help dissipate this suffocating atmosphere. Yenica was clearly still, breathing in short gasps, frantically turning her head as if she thought I wouldn't notice. She took the plate I handed her and started nibbling on the apple like a rabbit. I took a generous bite of another piece and began peeling another apple. Silence again. Quote ellipsis quote. Quote ellipsis quote. Then, suddenly, Yenica buried her face in her knees. Everything she did was unpredictable. What's the matter, Yenica? Are you hurt? No, it's just that, well, it's a bit awkward to say while looking at you. First of all, Ed, no, Mr. Ed, I have something I want to ask you, and it might sound really strange, so, could you please listen to me until the end before answering? Quote. I observed Yenika, who was rambling while her head was buried in her knees, for a moment and nodded. I took a deep breath and focused on peeling the apple as if it wasn't a big deal. Yenika seemed to have worried about something profound after the bizarre turn of events, now coming to ask me something. It looked like there was something she had decided to ask after some serious contemplation. Proper courtesy meant listening calmly to whatever she had to say, so I'd keep a straight face no matter what the topic, not look dumbfounded, and even if I was indeed startled, not to show it. That much I could manage. After all, I am an adult, despite what my appearance might suggest. With these thoughts in mind, I readied myself to listen to Yenika, determined to address her statement in the coolest, most down-to-earth way possible. What about, if I move out of Dex Hall and come to live in the camp with you, Ed? Whoosh. The knife, thrown off its usual path, sliced clean through my thumb. Quote. Blood dripped from my thumb, but neither Yenika nor I could pay any attention to the wound. The dark forest of the north, the campsite. The bright stars in the night skies always prevailed. Yet an unexpected anomaly had visited without warning. All I could do was to look dully at Yenika, an apple and knife in my hands. And Yenika, trying her best to hide from my glance, buried her blush-red face even deeper into her knees. And so for a long while, only the crackling sound of the campfire intruded on our silence. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 112. No matter how unexpected the situation, never panic. Stay calm, assess the situation, and find the most appropriate response. Whether you're living in the wild, engaging in combat, or dealing with the various events in a scenario, these were principles that must not be forgotten. After more than a year of such a lifestyle, I thought I had become adept at reacting skillfully to anything without panic, but then. Quote. Yenika's blunt remark momentarily made my brain feel like it had switched off and then back on again. Firstly, I needed to find a pretext to buy some time to gather my thoughts. Fortunately, I found an easy excuse. Drops of blood were falling from my thumb. After tending to the knife, I wrapped a leftover piece of cloth around my thumb as a makeshift bandage, which gave me enough time to come up with a brief reply. While I was performing this first aid, Yenika remained motionless as if she was about to exhale smoke from her face buried in her knees. Judging by her reaction, she seemed well aware of the implications of her own words. There was no mistake or misunderstanding on my part. The emergency treatment for my finger was complete, and it was time to face the issue again. Firstly, you are probably anticipating what I am about to discuss. Nonetheless, we need to go over this. After casually tossing the remaining cloth pieces into the campfire to burn them, I dabbed the bloodied knife with a handkerchief while speaking. Despite her deep reflections before speaking, I had to respond naturally without showing any surprise or incredulity. That was a matter of courtesy. It may seem unnecessary to say this out loud, but I do like you quite a bit. Not just me, most likely others think the same. You are indeed kind, diligent, and a fine person. My words, though merely a prelude to the main topic, made Yenika bury her head even deeper into her knees and tremble. I inadvertently took a false breath upon seeing her heave for air. Peeling the remaining skin off my apple, I bit into it. I had cut away the part stained with blood and didn't feel right offering it to Yenika. After allowing Yenika to regroup for a moment, I approached her again. However, we can't overlook the fact that I am also a man. Especially in situations like this, one must remain calm, realistic, and objective. Listen, Yenika, I'm not sure how you see yourself, but you are exceedingly beautiful. A true beauty. Anyone ordinary would find someone like you. Saint, stop. Her unexpected call to stop halted me mid-sentence. All my efforts to maintain a neutral expression and a calm tone felt futile. Was it all meaningless? Yenika, her head against her knees, was already blushing like a beetroot. It was as if she had been subjected to some cruel prank, her face wet with tears as she implored. I'm sorry, I can't breathe. Quote. No, I just can't breathe. May I take a moment to breathe deeply? She's still speaking formally. How stubborn can she be? Yes. Am I really going to indulge her in this? And so, we spent a good while longer simply listening to the sounds of the campfire. We'd make progress, take a break, then collect ourselves before attempting to speak again. It felt like we were defusing a bomb. I filled 2 wooden mugs with cold water, handed one to Yenika, and took a few sips from the other. Yenika took muck in her tiny hands and drank the water in one go, letting out a sigh that seemed to clear the atmosphere. Feeling more settled now, I broached the subject again. So, about living together. Just mentioning it seemed to make the tension skyrocket once more. Yenika buried her head, her face flushing anew. It seemed she was rethinking her words. This back and forth was getting nowhere. I had to plow through, bring the conversation to a conclusion quickly. Otherwise, we'd be here all night without resolving anything. Yenika had a curfew back at Dex Hall, after all. Luckily, I managed to keep my composure despite Yenika's bombshell. While momentarily thrown off balance, this was still something I could manage rationally. After all, I had learned to keep a cool head in any situation over the past year. And Yenika, despite her unexpected outburst that had caused tension, was still a reasonable person. For her, I needed to respond with level-headedness. Living under the same roof might lead to unpredictable outcomes, and nobody can foresee the consequences. I wish to always be considerate and respect you, but, to be frank, men are all similar in some respects. I appreciate your trust, and it's a good thing. But don't ever forget that the only person who can truly protect you is yourself, Yenika. Instead of dwelling on it, I brought the discussion to a swift conclusion. Yenika, hugging her knees, seemed to have listened to my words. I silently applauded myself for maintaining my rational mind up to this point. Now that it had come this far, Yenika wouldn't likely drop any further bombshells. Yet, as proof of my complacency, she locked eyes with me and began to speak. It would be different with you, Ed. Her words choked off my own voice again. She, too, took a while to process her own reflexive statement, visibly shivering as the color rushed back into her previously calm cheeks. The literal expression, lost for words, fittingly described the moment. I hesitated, unsure what to say, and managed only a stuttered attempt. Ed is different. Whether she bit her tongue trying to say, Ed is different, or something else, Yenika inhaled sharply and covered her mouth with both hands, watching my reaction. Already troubled by the escalating mood, her fumble seemed to embarrass her. As for me, I rubbed my chin to keep my composure in check. It was a combination of unfortunate events. I could normally handle any situation smoothly, but ironically, all sorts of circumstantial layers converged to push my rational mind to its limits. Imagine having just gone through an exhausting student council election campaign, and upon returning to camp, feeling a sense of relief and liberation. That's the backdrop to this situation. The end seemed in sight after enduring extreme situations, with the sheer effort to survive day by day lessening as basic infrastructure was established, leading to a lighter load and easier times. Then there was exchanging formalities with Yenika, making for a novelty tinged with a peculiar closeness, as if tiptoeing along a fine line between familiarity and strangeness. The bright moonlit night, the gentle glow of the campfire, the soothing sounds of insects humming in the grass, all add to the sentimentality of the atmosphere. And then there was the girl, blushing without restraint at her outburst, as if challenging the world to push her further into an emotional corner. I finally closed my eyes, surrendering. It felt almost calming to have reached this point. Yenika. Just whispering her name was enough to make her quiver. It wasn't easy for me either. Yet, there was a critical detail we couldn't simply gloss over. Every man could become a fawning yes man in such a scenario that threatened to overpower one's rational mind, but there was one crucial aspect that must not be overlooked. It was the circumstances that led Yenika to make such a statement. Though I was initially flustered by the unexpected and explosive nature of her statement, I couldn't afford to miss the essence of the matter because of being swayed by the situation. So, I asked her directly, "Are you having a tough time?" Her face paled as if doused with cold water. I could sense her deflating in an instant. Even if the Dex Hall was considered basic accommodation, it was hardly as harsh as living in the wild. By all accounts, it seemed quite habitable. But her sudden wish to live in the camp made the reason painfully clear. Yenika must have found herself under considerable stress. After nearly a year of living in close quarters with her peers, the strains of expectation, goodwill, and admiration became apparent. While these could drive some to surpass themselves, the same could act as poison for others. Quote ellipsis ellipsis dot quote. The silence returned with a subtly different texture. Yenika hugged her knees, staring blankly at the campfire before letting out a bitter laugh. Ed, you seem to know everything. Her ha-ha softened the mood. It was the same cheerful smile she gave when greeting friends around the academy. Despite its genuine nature, few could grasp the subtle weight that lurked within that deep psychology. In essence, perhaps Yenika. I wanted to escape. I miss the days of living alone in a private room in Ophelia's hall. Sounds foolish, doesn't it? Rather than respond emphatically, I simply shook my head sideways. After all, who would dare criticize someone for feeling that way? To me, this camp has been, like a refuge. That's why I wanted to flee here. Of course, it might have been an undue burden for you. Quote ellipsis ellipsis dot quote. For you, this camp represents a year's worth of hard work, right? Evidence of your fierce struggle to survive in the wild. And now, for me to impose on that, it's absurd. But that was something Yenika knew well. The suffocating heat that could bring someone to their knees, the bone-chilling cold of winter. All the various survival challenges interwoven with the development of this camp made it incredibly special to me. She understood better than anyone the nature of this place, a realm of loss. She considers it shameless to infringe upon such a space with her own emotional issues. Moreover, because of her steadfast character, there's a misunderstanding regarding the issue at hand. Specifically, her perception of the act of running away itself. Running away won't solve anything. Instead of fleeing from problems, you need to face them and fight back. Right. Even I had my moments of weakness. Yenika spoke, nodding to herself. Still, her demeanor remained tentative. Even so, I wanted to ask Ed at least once. I knew it would be burdensome, but I don't understand why I did it. Having said that, she sniffled and fell silent. For a while, we simply shared time, looking at the campfire. With my elbows on my knees, I looked up at the starry sky. The constellations shone brilliantly, but beneath them, darkness reigned on the ground. I couldn't even clearly see what lay beyond the thicket. Life is often like this, and Yenika was no exception. I tossed the remains of an apple into the campfire. It's definitely burdensome, I murmured, speaking the truth plainly. I couldn't treat Yenika with deceit since she was so earnest. Yenika, completely deflated by my words, propped her head on her knees and let out a wry laugh. Overall, you're right Yenika, I said. Even hearing someone suddenly declare they're alive at camp leaves one dumbfounded, not knowing how to react. Hee, I guess so. Her voice was soaked at the end, touching my heart, so I decided not to drag the conversation any further. I dusted off my clothes, stood up, and sat down next to Yenika. Sitting side by side, I was struck by the girl's petite frame. Now you're not using formal speech. Ah. Surprised, Yenika hiccuped and promptly swallowed her breath. Perhaps finally breaking her obstinate resolve which I could not fathom the meaning of. It seems now I understand. The reason she insisted on keeping her distance with formalities was due to realizing the reality of the situation. Whether it was hope or respect, as the burden on Yenika grew, given her sincere and solid nature, she likely felt compelled to confront issues head-on. If that were the case, whether it was making the camp a place of refuge or my presence, you can't help thinking it's best to create some distance. She was enamored with the compulsion that running away isn't the answer. She may still be too young and inexperienced to fully understand. Reality is strangely different from a fairy tale world, where more often than not, running away may be the right answer when faced with trials. I've seen far more people become happy by seeking different paths in life rather than insisting on facing hardships and accumulating emotional scars. But for Yenika, who has lived a life always receiving sincere respect and goodwill, running away and turning her back on that goodwill probably wasn't even an option. And that's problematic. But here's the thing, Yenika. Strictly speaking, isn't my feeling of burden an entirely separate matter? Let's not be so arrogant. It's normal in life to impose burdens on others and to deal with what others impose on us. Who can live without ever relying on someone? We just live by leaning on each other. Quote. And just to point out, I owe you a lot. Whether it was help with spirit magic lessons or maintaining a recluse's life, I have a great debt to Yunica. That's why I've set my next magical training goals on the staff. I had nothing else to offer as recompense. It might seem normal, but for this girl, even that expected recompense is a debt on her conscience. Being born with a kind heart and charm is a delightful thing, but sometimes, it can become a burden. I'm prepared to take on the burden since I owe you, even if it's a bit heavy. Well, if it feels like the books aren't balancing, next time I'll just ask for something burdensome in return. We're not going to see each other for just a day or two, are we? Like ebb and flow, we just need to give and take. We're going to know each other for a long time. Then, even so, living under one roof could be burdensome. Maybe we should build another cabin. Yunica's pupils seemed to dilate slightly at that. Using formal speech and re-establishing our relationships, reverting to an awkward relationship to objectively view one another, all had their significance. Experiencing a fresh and awkward relationship had its merits as well. Yunica, too, no matter how stingy the relationship, would not hesitate to lend a hand if someone needed help. If she saw someone lying on the road in pain, whether they were a beggar or a thief, she'd help first before making distinctions. It's difficult to ask directly, especially if it's unfamiliar, but she'd muster the courage to offer assistance. Excuse me, do you need help? However, life isn't always fair. Not every act of kindness is rewarded. Even if one lives a life of generosity, when you're in pain, there's no guarantee someone will be at your side. How sad it must be to sit crying on the curb with no one to say a caring, "Excuse me," and offer a word. Eventually, someone who can't resist will reach out to that shoulder. That's the difference between someone who lives giving and someone who doesn't. Quote. After finishing speaking, I felt somewhat awkward and simply gazed up at the sky. I expected Yunica's character to be bouncing with joy, but her reaction was surprisingly calm. With Yunica's arms around my shoulders, she hugged me earnestly, and soon, with a half-soaked voice, she spoke. Thank you. Holding Yunica close, I stroked her hair gently with one hand, and I gazed quietly at the sky. The night sky of Akan Island was high and bright. Good morning, Master Ed. I'm not sure if this has been sudden, but will explain slowly. The next morning, after sending Yunica back to Dex Hall and catching some sleep myself, the sight that greeted me was one of a camp full of spirits. At the center of them was the high-level fire spirit Tarkhan, almost invisible to the average level of perception. Quote. Oh, you're up. Ed lost Tylee. The mighty spirit, swaying its tail back and forth, commanding an army of spirits, was the very definition of a legion commander. Just in time, I needed your opinion. I have no experience in building cabins. I'd like to replicate the feel of your cabin, and while the spirits, nifty hands can handle cutting and preparing the logs, construction itself seems to be a delicate task. Could you start by slowly explaining what's going on here? Look around, we're building a hut. Following last night, Yunica clung to me for a while with her face flushed like a tomato before returning to the dormitory. We planned to slowly discuss details such as her transfer to the camp, handing in her notice, and cabin construction over the next few days. We'll discuss the specifics later. To be honest, I'm quite tired. There's been a party in the spirit world overnight, well, no need to get into details. Anyway, we're celebrating and we've got work to do. Without any clearer explanation given. Initial clearing of the ground has been done, but, building it directly opposite the fire feels aesthetically better, the romantic feeling of stepping out in the morning and facing each other. Yet, side by side might not be bad either, close, but with just enough privacy to, or perhaps as close as possible. Are you telling me this has all happened overnight? Sorry, I'm dead without initiative. Was Tarkhan holding a grudge because I had beheaded it in Act 1? The sight of Tarkhan chuckling made shivers run down my spine. The overall plan is set for about 10 days, Lord Tarkhan. As a site foreman muck, I will establish the most efficient work plan. 10 days. Yes. Considering the spirits, shift rotation and rest plan, that's the time frame. Reducing the work period will depend on the schedule's progress. Rest. Why rest? Tarkhan frowned at the thought, lowering his voice as he spoke. I don't understand, why take a break? Back in my day, you could carry a shaman around for 3 days straight, cross snow-capped mountains for almost a week, and still be fit for battle the next day. These days with more shamans and easier contracts, lower-tier spirits have lost their discipline. They're all about eating their fill and resting, barely thinking of work. How can they hope to transform, rise to mid-tier, let alone meet a worthy higher shaman to contract with? Muck, evidently adept at reading the room, could not resist nodding despite the chill Tarkhan's words gave him. So, if I try to pull forward the schedule, could we manage in a week? What if we proceed without shift rotations, can we cut the schedule even further? Do you realize how hard Yenica is trying to hang on every day? And with the transfer decided, she must be going to bed with a racing heart full of anticipation. Can't you imagine that feeling? As Muck's face blanched, Tarkhan fluidly continued. Wrap it up in 5 days. For construction advice, this Ed lost Tylee here is enough to ask. Yes. Understood. And with that, the spirit with its enormous tail waltzed off. This brutal schedule, how do we manage this? Looking over the camp, various spirits were sweating profusely. Moving lumber around. If it comes to it, I'll just have to do it, Muck, I must. After all, I was at the root of all this. Muck, slumped in defeat on a log stump after Tarkhan's departure, elicited a silent tribute from me. Really, sorry about this, Muck. It wasn't intentional, really. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 113. On the day the Archmage died. 1. Adele, the caretaker of the Holy Fire. She was the girl who would come to the window of Saint Clarissa's bedroom every day to play the lute when the saint was in the Holy City. I wonder if it's time for the joint combat training. I guess we'll be sparring with the second-year seniors too. During the night at Ophelius Hall, Kylie, Saint Clarice, recalled the memories of the time she spent in the Holy City. Adele's songs and longing for freedom instilled in her a secret new dream. If not for Adele's influence, Clarice might have never sought to learn all the way in Sylvania. Even after Adele had left the Holy City, Clarice continued to eagerly await the day she would meet her again. However, despite some time passing since her enrollment, Clarice had yet to encounter an opportunity to meet Adele. Quote. In the heart of Carpea, the city-state that is both the sanctum of the Telos Order and the largest city on the continent, stood a magnificent cathedral reaching towards the heavens. This cathedral, known as the Holy Imperial City Tsungwangdu, Sacred Dragon where Sovereign Eldain resided and propagated the will of the gods, was considered a sacred place by believers of Telos spread across the continent. This great cathedral, grand and majestic in size, could occupy an entire large hill and match the size of several lords' castles combined. It was, of course, just as lofty in height. From the cathedral's towering clock tower, one could see the Remelin Mountains to the north and the Dinkan Swamp that leads to the Chloral Empire to the south. Atop that clock tower always burned the holy fire in honor of the supreme god Telos. There sat the girl who managed the holy fire, always gazing upon the open world. The girl who proudly boasted a nobility second only to that of Sovereign Eldain was indeed looking down upon the world from a higher place than Clarice. Clarice desperately wished to meet that very minstrel, Adele. However, Clarice was a first year, and Adele was a second year. It wasn't that there were no opportunities to interact with the second-year students, but Adele rarely appeared at such events. Adele was such a busy figure that even among her own year, few knew exactly where she might be found. Without the audacity to barge into classrooms or dormitories during lessons, Clarice had no choice but to concentrate on her academic life, thinking, we'll meet when the time comes. Yet, as she started to get accustomed to academic life, there still appeared to be no sign of meeting her. The thought that Adele didn't come to visit her even after hearing the news of the saint's enrollment at the academy was beginning to feel a bit heartless. But Clarice shook off these thoughts. Her current situation was unique. She was attending academic life not as Saint Clarice, but as Kylie, a noble from the outskirts. Adele might not know of these circumstances, which could make things awkward. However, she wondered if Adele had noticed that the person currently posing as a saint seemed like an imposter. Their positions were slightly misaligned. Yet, Clarice decided not to rush things. Fate is like a wandering breeze. If destinies are intertwined, one will eventually meet again somewhere in the world and exchange warm greetings. That was what Adele used to say. Clarice agreed with these words and smiled while looking up at the moon. Being in the same Sylvania, living in the same academy, if their connection was true, they would surely meet again. She earnestly hoped that the connection would bring them together soon so that they could address their longings. Lucy Mayrill sat on the roof of a hut with her knees drawn up to her chest. Her eyes half narrowed in thought. Seated there, she could take in the entire camp at a glance, but the sight that met her eyes didn't quite please her. The spectacle of various spirits carrying well-crafted timber and building huts seemed like intruders breaching her camp. Technically, it wasn't even Lucy's camp to begin with, so it wasn't her place to complain in the first place. Still, it left her feeling less than refreshed. With a sulky face, she blew out her breath or aimlessly twisted her hair around, almost devoid of expression for someone as emotionally reserved as Lucy. The girl, who was practically the cause of this, Yenneca Faylover, was sitting by the central campfire, stretching her legs out. The construction of the huts, originally planned to be driven to harsh conditions by the spirits to complete in 5 days, came to a halt when Yenneca gave Tarkon a knuckle rap on the forehead with her staff. The lower spirits, especially Muck, silently wept tears of relief as they clapped their hands. The construction plan for the huts, which progressed as scheduled, was moving along well until the 3rd day. Yenneca was so proud that she sat in the camp all day, humming with joy. Lucy, sitting on Ed's hut roof, felt uncomfortable seeing this. Even if it wasn't Lucy, anyone watching Yenneca's actions might tilt their head curiously. She sat by the fire poking at logs, stretched her arms and legs, took in the camp view, glanced over the hut foundation, then grinned. Her laugh was so innocently radiant that it seemed to bloom flowers around her. In between reading books, she would glance at the hut foundation and gloat, go out to gather some firewood, then survey the surroundings of the hut and return with a wide smile. She seemed deep in thought after practicing some spirit resonance training alone. Watching the scene, Lucy's displeasure grew and she eventually forgot to take her nap, sitting up with puffed cheeks. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. After about 5 minutes, Lucy decided to grab a few dried meats hung on the drying rack and flew towards the campfire. Thud. Landing gracefully beside the fire on a rock, Lucy dusted off her clothes and stood up. Looking down, she saw Yenneca sitting on a log turning the corner of a book and spinning into rosy imaginations, truly a frivolous expression. Ah! Yenneca and Lucy locked eyes. Innocent Yenneca almost greeted her cheerfully, but she instinctively knew this wasn't someone to be glad to see. They had already had a skirmish back at Ophelia's Hall. Although Yenneca didn't like to clash with anyone, Lucy was hardly a welcome presence. She didn't want to be nasty or say anything unpleasant, but she couldn't just give in. Eventually, Yenneca took a glance at the hut from her seat, placed her hands on her hips, and proudly puffed out her chest, trying to look as arrogant as possible. Even in her own way, she was making an effort to smile, her face radiating a floral glow that Lucy coldly observed with her half-moon eyes. To think such a bright smile could be so vexing was almost miraculous. With a couple of pieces of dried meat in her mouth and an armful of elementary books, I exited the student library. Thanks to regularly borrowing and returning books on time without accruing any late fees, I was now able to borrow quite a number of books at once. Admittedly, being acquainted with the librarian Elka Islan helped, as she turned a blind eye to some aspects. Carrying the hefty load of books, I descended the slope of the library and headed straight for the eastern plaza near the faculty buildings. I borrowed so many books dedicated to elemental studies because I intended to complete my training in intermediate magic at once. Not long after mastering the intermediate spell, Point Explosion, I realized that it was the only intermediate spell I truly knew how to wield. Although powerful in its own right, the impact of Point Explosion was not much different from lower-tier spells. Its ease of activation, suitability for surprise attacks, and difficulty to counter were its key advantages. Such strategic benefits are helpful in my fighting style, but I still feel the need to master a spell that's purely powerful in terms of raw firepower. After all, you never know how a battle might unfold, so it only makes sense to be prepared. I have a strong affinity for the elements of fire and wind. While I initially contemplated mastering intermediate wind magic, I soon changed my mind. Wind elemental spells often aim to control the battlefield or support combat rather than deliver sheer destructive force. Since I knew how to handle magic tools and invoke spirits, I could create such variables through other means. To truly grow stronger right now, honing a spell with undeniable firepower is the most efficient choice. That's why I borrowed a pile of elemental books, searching for a suitable magic spell to set as my next goal. The stack was so large that I had to carry it against my chest as I walked. Considering this another form of physical training, I crossed the Eastern Plaza. Off the Central Plaza, where the Student Union and Obel Hall are located, lies Eastern Plaza that stretches to the east. Rather small compared to the Central Plaza, it still had everything a proper plaza would need, like a sizable clock tower, benches scattered around, and a rather charming fountain. As I saw a girl sitting by the fountain plucking a lute, I recognized that familiar face. In a way, no one embodied the expression, free-spirited, better than she did. She seemed at ease, perhaps done with all her scheduled classes for the day, comfortably dressed. The baggy pleated skirt falling over her thighs and the loose-sleeved blouse were exactly as I remembered. A flower bouquet-shaped accessory hung from her waist, cascading down her side. Her yellowish blonde hair, beautifully braided to one side, was adorned with an array of lovely flowers, including lilies, daffodils, baby's breath, coxcombs, and freesia. The subtle color of her hair only highlighted their delicate beauty further. "You seem busy today, Senior Ed." I considered passing by when Adele suddenly reached out to me with a swift greeting. This unforeseen encounter made me cock my head in surprise. With our eyes meeting, Adele flashed a grin as she strummed her lute. It was unclear if they were close enough to acknowledge each other or not. Adele Saris is a companion of Tylee McClure, the protagonist of Sylvania's Failed Swordsman. As a bard who freely uses various enhancement magics, she consistently appeared since Act 1, showing her face, but she doesn't take an active front and center role until the final battle of Act 3. The fact that she was seen regularly was mostly like a delightful addition, more of a garnish in an apothecary. She does seriously participate in the battle at the final of Act 2, but even after that, she doesn't seem to be doing much. Until then, Adele mostly appeared playing her instrument in unexpected places, perhaps an artistic choice to emphasize her free-spirited nature and indifference to worldly strife. No matter how dire the situation, the girl who never lost her composure, playing her instrument. The reason she could remain so serene was due to her prophetic temperament. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Sometimes, Adele would receive divine energy from the god Telos, allowing her to see the future. It wasn't a power she could freely control, instead, she would suddenly receive revelations and recite the future as if entranced. She was able to do this due to her unique sensitivity to Telos's divine energy from birth. Consequently, she was treated quite well even in the Holy City, and in her youth, she was listed as a candidate for sainthood. Are you speaking about me? I often heard the stories that Tylee and Aila had about you. They seem to think of Senior you in a complex way, but... Is that so? It's none of my business, though. Tylee, the main character of the scenarios, seemed to be on the rise already. With immense talent in swordsmanship, he's bound to boast an overwhelming power level by Act 4. The scenario was already midway through Act 3, so he might be starting to stand out now. I have nothing much to do with him, a different year, and I've kept a slight distance from the incidents, but I know well that Tylee's growth curve is not likely to be stopped easily. If he continues his growth without a single waste, maximizing efficiency, he could defeat not only Wade but even Zix in the next joint combat training event. That's, of course, if he was a fully trained player. Normally, defeating Wade alone is trouble enough, so he probably won't concern himself with going that far. Would you like to listen to a song? I'm quite the minstrel, having traveled across the continent. Though now I'm settled here in Sylvania. No, thank you. Oh dear, that's a shame. I did not understand why Adele, whom I hardly faced directly, was being so friendly with me. Perhaps it was due to the rapidly improving reputation within the academy, or maybe it was simply because my name circulated among those close to Adele. Conspicuously holding onto my elemental study books, it was as if I was giving a silent signal that I was carrying a heavy burden and needed to deal with it quickly. With a smile of disappointment, Adele graciously bowed her head in farewell. I turned on my heel and headed towards the northern forest. The scenario was now passing the midway point of Act 3. The political scene, which had been deforming slightly, began to shift off course a great deal with Tanya's election as chairman. Even though the scenario flowed somewhat evenly until Act 1, it shook greatly in Act 2, and by Act 3, its direction became unpredictable. However, the major flow was still similar to what I knew, so the knowledge of the future I held was still sufficiently useful. Yet, the twisted flow could lead to unknown consequences. It's like drawing a line along a dotted path. If you follow the dots without a hint of wavering, a perfect straight line will be drawn, but even the slightest shake will introduce a twist in the angle. At first, the minor difference might seem inconsequential, but as the line extends, it becomes vastly separated from the dotted path. I had no grand ambition to speak of, and merely graduating was my goal. I simply wanted to survive. However, to believe that everything would flow according to my will was arrogance. If the current flow of the world has come to this, merely breathing quietly won't solve anything. The course of politics had begun to shift. If we would restore it, we had to capture Krebin. But Krebin, in his current state, politically unassailable, powerful, with many loyal followers who supported him across the empire, killing or subduing him would only make me a vile traitor and ruin my life. To become strong enough to oppose Krebin, I still needed more time, and even if I had someone's help to confront him, without a just cause, I can't cut off his head. However, I am not without cards to play. There's Tanya, an insider of the Rothtaler family, and Princess Phenia, who stands in opposition to him. When Act 4 arrives and Mebular's manifestation draws near, Krebin will surely expose his own weakness. At the same moment, without fail, he will show his vulnerability. I must gauge the right moment to strike at the enemy's neck. When his vile plot begins to surface, I must be fully prepared. Senior Ed. Suddenly, Adele called out to me as I was about to leave. I turned back in confusion, but Adele, without even looking in my direction, jovially strummed her lute. The pleasant sound of the strings blended with the splashing of the fountain, filling the late spring square with music. One day, if you ascend to the head of the family, you will have to kill the person you respect the most with your own hands. It was a casual remark, thrown in without any warning. Keep in mind, if you hesitate then, you will be the one to die. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. I considered pressing for more details, but it seemed pointless. After all, Adele swiftly strummed her lute one last time, producing a beautiful tone before rising and quickly disappearing into the distance. Clutching the elemental studies books, I just stood there, watching Adele walk away. Then, I sighed deeply. Holy Administrator Adele, the romantic Adele, and the prophet Adele. Her prophecies did not always come true, so assigning a specific meaning to them was difficult, but nonetheless, she certainly had a knack for unsettling people's hearts. There were many scenes that come to mind when I think of Adele, but the first and foremost is her death. Act 3 of Sylvania's Failed Swordsman is an important turning point in the scenario. If the final boss, Lucy, remains idle, they will safely complete their role and temporarily exit the stage, but during that scenario, 2 members of the protagonist generation will die independently of Lucy's actions. One of them is precisely this minstrel, Adele. The macroscopic flow still runs nearly parallel to the original scenario, but with significant deviations already occurring. Knowing her fate, what stance should I take now? Professor Glast's death was beyond my control. No matter what I did, he would have seized the seal and taken over the academy, and as a mere student, I was not in a position to influence someone of his standing. No guarantee could be made that I had the power to change Adele's fate, but knowing her unfortunate end, it couldn't help but make me feel uneasy. I rubbed my forehead several times, then with the books in embrace, I headed towards the northern forest. For now, I needed to return to the camp, finish organizing the books, prepare for wand crafting, and complete the immediate tasks at hand. All the while, there were too many thoughts to organize. I dislike it. It was a clear and firm response. Lucy, who had been chewing on jerky by the campfire and fiddling with her knees, seemed to be in a bad mood. Quote. This was an unexpected reaction. I had broken off 2 branches from the guardian tree of Merelda for wand crafting and asked Lucy to help by infusing them with lightning magic. Lightning manifested with Lucis magic would be incredibly powerful given the sheer amount of her magical power, positively affecting the direct performance of the wands. I planned to make 2 wands struck by lightning, one for Yenica and one for myself. I wasn't expecting any issue with this request, given that Lucy often grants my favors, but today, she seemed off, like something was bothering her. I only want to help with one. Still hugging her knees and pouting, her sulking figure was unusually fresh to see. Usually sleepy or indifferent, this different expression on Lucy was new to me. Though she still looked somewhat dazed and lifeless, the slight puffing of her cheeks was something I hadn't seen before. I'm not used to her showing more varied expressions lately, though it's not many. Isn't making 1 or 2 the same? You only have to manifest the magic once anyway. Quote. Ah well, if you say so, there must be a reason. It complicates things. As I spoke and ran a hand through my hair, Lucy began swinging her feet in the air, as if something was particularly on her mind. If you make 1, who will use it? I'll give it to Yenica. After all, it's better for someone who could make better use of it to have it. I still need to practice more spirit magic. Yeesh. Seemingly uncomfortable with my disappointment, Lucy chewed her lip, bowed her head, and groaned. Then, she stood up abruptly and walked over to where I was sitting on a log. Thinking she might stick to me as usual, I stayed still, but then Lucy cast her gaze downward, pulled her hat low, and sat down on my knees. She lay her back snugly against my chest, and while her weight was barely noticeable, a bit heavier than the pile of books I had carried with just my arm muscles. Fine, I'll do it. Both of them, she added, after agreeing. But there's a condition. It's nothing much. A condition. There's a place I would like you to accompany me to. Lucy bringing this up was unusual, so I nodded in curiosity without a choice. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 114. On the day the Archmage died too. Although Archmage Gluck is a figure from the past, he is frequently mentioned in the scenario of Sylvania Academy's failed swordsman. He has left behind many traces of his existence. Recognized for his varied achievements in almost every field at numerous academies, he explored elemental studies, magical creature ecology, herbology, mana manipulation, sensitivity principles, and elementalism. He served directly under the royal family as a mage, exterminated magical creatures, spent years as a mercenary, saved border city-states from crises, and even simultaneously subdued both the highest-ranking fire elemental Theophis and the highest-ranking water elemental Pride. He truly lived the life of a hero. After his retirement, he devoted himself to nurturing the next generation, following the will of his mentor Archmage Sylvania, and invested all his lifelong assets into educational and academic research funding. It was said that he hardly spent any money on himself. The remnants of his presence are clearly left here at Sylvania Academy. There is the Gluck Hall among the 3 buildings of the Student Union, the Gluck Scholarship Foundation which I once relied on, and Gluck's magical theories that remain part of the standard curriculum. If Archmage Sylvania was the founder of Sylvania Academy, then Archmage Gluck could be considered the main contributor who took on its maintenance and developed it into the world's leading educational institution. I've read materials from the setting books, and since coming into this world, I've memorized the biographies to the point where I could recite them by heart. After all, he's one of the major figures discussed in the subject of magical history. However, his end remains undisclosed. At least, historically speaking. But, I had a rough idea, as Sylvania's failed swordsman, somewhat covered the past of Lucy. After liquidating all his assets and feeling that he had done all he could, he retired to a vast mountain range in the northwestern region of Rameln. There, in a monastery, he discovers an abandoned Lucy and takes her in, immediately recognizing the girl's magical talent and bestowing upon her the star's blessing, which swiftly unlocked her potential. Unexpectedly, Lucy's magical talent turned out to be even more tremendous than Gluck had anticipated. Even left to her own devices, the girl would have awakened to her magical power and made a name for herself as a sorceress. And to think, she even met a great archmage who would go down in history as her mentor. Thus, their combined potentials triggered a chemical reaction, turning her into a gemstone of vast talent. Nevertheless, Archmage Gluck thus spent his twilight years in the Rameln mountain range, casually engaging in writing activities, surviving, and refining the human gem named Lucy Mayrill. Eventually, he reaches the end of his life. On a rainy day, in a humble shack, the past glory of a supreme figure who swayed the world and led human history was nowhere to be seen, as Archmage Gluck laid completely withered. His back was bent, his face covered in deep wrinkles. Half of his face was hidden by a bushy beard, and his hair had turned white, devoid of any luster. There was no family by his side. His wife, whom he met in his youth, had lost her life while subduing Theophis, and those he could call friends had all passed from this world. After becoming a notable figure, the people he met either revered him or sought to take advantage of his fame. Such is the lonely nature of those at the pinnacle. He had a long journey. If turned into a book, his life would be enough to create a grand adventure epic. Yet, in the end, there was someone to carry on his will. That alone made him feel he had lived a successful life. The tapping of the rain against the shack's roof marked the end of one magician's journey. And so my journey began. Though now, it's over. Over. Dusk. After a lively day in Arkansas, this time was the bridge between the busy daylight and the tranquil night. The sky was painted red, ready to welcome the long night ahead. As we stepped into the darkening eastern sky, Lucy and I walked together for a while. Lucy clung to my arm, leading the way with determination, and I simply matched my pace to hers. Lucy, able to lighten her weight to fly or even teleport long distances using spatial magic with a bold use of her mana, had once zoomed from the Ophelius Hall to the northern forest in a blink. Yet, Lucy chose to walk slowly. There seemed to be a desire to match our steps, and she probably had things she wanted to say before reaching our destination. "You can let go of my hand. I'm not going anywhere." After leaving the northern forest and passing through the residential area near the western coast, we walked quite a distance. We received many curious glances from people along the way, which made my face uncomfortably itchy. The sight of Lucy pulling me along seemed curious indeed to onlookers. Lucy's name is Sylvania Academy's valedictorian and a prodigious magician was well known. Though not everyone recognized her face, those who did sure took note. Especially current Sylvania students. Already feeling awkward from the looks we got passing through the residential area, and my arm was starting to tingle from being outstretched for so long. "It looks like I'm being dragged around. You don't have to hold on." With that, Lucy glanced at her own arm and then back at my face. Her gaze still seemed vacant, but perhaps there was a hint of more emotion than before. They say that even a heart will open up over time, and this girl, who once seemed like a talking doll, was beginning to look more human-like, which was quite fascinating to see. Lucy let go of my arm and absent-mindedly twirled the tips of her white hair. She then pulled down her large witch hat and nodded. "So, where are we going? You could have just told me ahead of time, it wouldn't have hurt anyone." "We're heading to the west coast of Arkansas. We're almost there." "Just the coast. You suddenly felt like seeing the sea." "It can't be just that." Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Lucy tried to speak but seemed to struggle with the explanation and simply shook her head. She flapped her spare sleeve and pointed toward the direction we were heading. I was about to ask but simply acknowledged and continued following Lucy. "Do you know where that old man's hometown is?" Archmage glucked. According to history class, he was from the lawless region of Caheln. Lucy shook her head. "That was just where he spent some of his childhood." "What? The history books are wrong." That was a curious assertion. It's not often someone can confidently say the books themselves are flawed, especially someone in front of me. Since the information came from Lucy, who heard it from Gluck himself, it's likely her words are accurate. "Then, it's here, this Arkansas." Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Adjusting her hat and looking up at the sky, Lucy's eyes reflected the wide expanse of the early evening sky. A few birds took flight into the sunset, disappearing into the distant forest. From this point on, we delved into the realm beyond the scenario or even history. There's no mention of it in the Sylvania's Failed Swordsman setting books or in any historical records of this world. These were the kinds of stories that lay submerged beneath the surface. Back when that old man was eagerly seeking knowledge, this Arkansas had no big schools, just a few local tribes and magical creatures all around. That makes sense. After all, the major subjugation of the magical creatures on Arkansas didn't occur until after Sylvania Academy was established. Back then, even though Sylvania Academy existed, it was incredibly minor, it could barely be called a school. It was almost like a private tutoring building, he'd said. The school was built by Archmage Sylvania on this very Arkansas. A school that, at that time, lacked prestige and had no ability to gather students properly. How Gluck spent his childhood on Arkansas after meeting Sylvania, neither I nor Lucy could know. Sylvania Academy is a treasure painstakingly crafted by Master Sylvania Robespierre for the advancement of scholarship throughout his life. Many prescient trials are already foreseen to assail this precious treasure. Of course, probably only visible properly through the eyes of Master Sylvania, the stellar scholar. Trials will strengthen the earth after the rain, and most will be overcome by Sylvania Academy on its own, but there is one trial that won't be surmounted without your power. When that time comes, for the sake of this old man, would you lend your strength? Lucy. What was so enjoyable about constantly reminiscing about his days seeking knowledge on Arkansas, and even when dying, he worried only about this school. He was really a foolish old man. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. His true home at heart was always Arkansas. There's no helping it then. No helping it. What does she mean by that? I'm about to ask when suddenly I am at a loss for words. A conjecture forms in my mind, and I realize what she might be implying. As mentioned, this is a story from beneath the surface. Not written in any scenario or history book, but nevertheless something that can't be ignored. Archmage Gluck, who met his end in the mountain cabin of Ramelan's northern range. And Lucy, who was by his side. Despite losing the old man who was both father and mentor, immersed in her grief. Yet reality flows on. All that remains for Lucy now is a dilapidated cabin without an owner and one cold, lifeless body. A time comes when one must choose their own path in life. The period of protection within the cradle is over. What did Lucy most likely want to do first? She had to tend to her master's corpse. It was a horrific and sad task, but not a difficult one. Lucy, at that time, would have had sufficient magical ability to bury her master with a simple spell. However, Lucy did not do so. From this point on, Lucy's own explanation was needed. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Walking along the western coast, Lucy continued her narrative. My intermittent responses punctuated her storytelling, doing nothing more than listening. The body was covered in a blanket, tightly bound with leather straps, and constantly maintained with a freezing spell to prevent decay. With a proper application of buoyancy magic, despite being inefficient, it could be carried without much trouble. Yet, sustaining this for even an hour would exhaust any average mage. It was something Lucy could handle because of her prowess. She haphazardly packed all the food and miscellaneous items from the cabin into a leather backpack and set off towards the Rameln mountain region. The destination was Akan Island, at the southernmost tip of the continent. A chill ran down my spine. Even if a straight line was drawn across a world map with a quill, it would take a great distance to reach that point. From the Rameln Mountains, going south and further south. Through the Uruk Forest, across the Aila Great Lakes, to the Alchemists, land of Crete, across Malin Plains, bypassing the holy city of Carpea, crossing the Denkan marshlands, and finally reaching the border of the Chloral Empire. Following the Teldon River downstream, past the commercial city of Oldic, through the territories of Earl Aeoln, Baron Islan, Count Sile, Duke Rothtailor, Marquis Fetter, and again past Count Tiss. After crossing the Zenith mountain range and crossing the Dress River, moving southwest through the territory of Margrave Jazul, passing through the Cranball Great Forest and traveling over the plains, only then do they glimpse the Mexa's grand bridge leading to Akan Island in the distance. All this journey, preserving her master's body with magic, using levitation spells for transport, and maintaining her own magical strength to move and survive. How long did it take? 3 months. I lost my way a bit. When she arrived, it was hard to recognize it as a person anymore. The place Lucy led me to was a coastal cave, further into the outskirts of the western coast. The cave, near the cliffs that emerged when following the coastal path, had a smaller entrance than expected, making it difficult to notice. As Lucy and I entered side by side, the interior was quite spacious, but it was unclear whether it was a natural cave or it had been expanded by Lucy. It was a cave in name, but scattered light from breaks in the destroyed rock permeated inside, making it rather bright. Continuing further inside, the scenery opened again. The outer wall was completely gone, revealing an expansive view of the ocean at a glance. The place was sunny with cool sea breezes, and flowers growing among the rocks added to the warmth of the place. A crudely made tombstone stood alone amidst the flowers. In front of the tombstone, various sundries were placed. Probably what the owner of the stone had possessed in life. It was hard to find just based on fragmented old testimonies, but after scouring the island for a week, I found it. Lucy walked past the tombstone and took a seat facing the sea. This is where the Grand Sorcerer and the sage used to share and hone their teachings. This cave with an ocean view was a place full of memories for the deceased Grand Sorcerer, perhaps the scenes from the distant past he had called to mind at the end of his life. Instead of his exploits over the continent, perhaps it was the days of bickering with his pupil and honing magic that he ultimately conjured in his life's final moments. For Lucy, that seemed to be the case, as only the solitary tombstone now occupied the open cave. The wind blew. It was a moist sea breeze. Lucy's hair, normally tied in 2 pretty braids, danced in the wind, catching the light of the late evening sky and casting a strange, reddish hue. I calmly approached the tombstone to look at the items placed there, miscellaneous items such as a frayed staff or a worn robe. Quote. But among them, a book caught my eye. An ordinary person would not have been able to suppress a gasp. Introduction to Sanctity Magic, author Glast Eldane. Quote. I didn't make my emotions obvious. But anyone with even a bit of magic education would understand. Within the realm of sanctity magic, there can be no such thing as an introduction. It's a field that even the greatest mages have struggled to refine over a long period without establishing a clear framework, a domain of magic like an unconquered mountain. Until his dying moment, the Grand Sorcerer Glast had been drafting a book to solidify sanctity magic. While he never published it, his existence in book form indicated that a draft had been somewhat completed. Its magical value is immeasurable, and even converting it to monetary value would yield the same. Glast's Southern Travels, a record of the magic of the southern lands, was auctioned for about 7,000 Flen gold coins. He'd said it would be his final work, but could he have been gathering his last strength for this ultimate posthumous work? The value of this tome, containing his interpretation of sanctity magic, was immeasurable at least to me. Take it if you want. I don't need it, I already know everything inside. Lucy, who had been sitting with her knees hugged, gazing at the sea, spoke unhurriedly. This book was a remnant of Glast. Understanding its significance to Lucy, I could not respond thoughtlessly. Yet, Lucy spoke while looking calmly at the sky. This is where my journey ends. From the Ramelin Mountains to Akan Island. It was a hellish journey even to imagine, but she was able to finish it, probably because of the unresolved feelings her master left behind. Still, I haven't even lived half the life allotted to me. I might embark on another journey or just live out the rest without much aim. But, I'm determined to fulfill the promise I made to that old man. The promise to protect Sylvania if it ever faces a crisis. That's the last duty I have left. No question followed about how I knew this. I had already heard of the will Glast left for Lucy. That last vow was likely why Lucy remained in Sylvania, the final anchor in her life. Only after fulfilling that promise could she fully release herself from the shadows and constraints of her master. I'm afraid of the emptiness that will come after I've put all of this behind me. It was unusual for Lucy to be so talkative. But her voice, heavy and slightly absent, was the same. Meanwhile, the sky above remained beautifully peaceful. Lucy, having witnessed Glast's twilight years closely, realized how terrifying it was to be cast alone in this vast world without reason or purpose. She knew herself. Lucy was absurdly born with immense power. If she decided to, she could become the continent's greatest mage and may even threaten the legacies of the legendary Sylvania and Glast. But if what remained at the end was only emptiness, what meaning would life have? Thus, the girl seeks reasons to live. Just as her master had run from the void all his life, she did the same. For her master, memories of this coastal cave and Sylvania were enough to cherish at the end of his days. Where would Lucy be allowed to go? That question oscillated between anticipation and fear, perpetually coiling and resting in her heart. Therefore, she could only become indifferent. Losing interest in the world, she could only live life going with the flow. By coming to Akan Island and burying her master, she concluded the first journey of her life to some extent. At that point, her world slowly began to fade to monochrome. Was it the grave that made her feel so invariably melancholic? The girl halted a sniffle as she hugged her knees. It wasn't a moment for tears, just a touch of sadness. It was all in the past. With a soft tone, Lucy spoke. It's not a very pleasant story, nor is it enjoyable to hear. And coming to such a place is just troublesome. Behind her, I sat quietly in front of the tombstone, silently listening. I just really wanted to show you this place. Only one trial remained in the girl's life. Once it was over, she could break free from the shadows and anchors of her master and lead her own life fully. However, a life without direction is like a ship lost in the currents. Knowing that feeling all too well, I just sat with Lucy for a while. The sun set in the western sky. The sound of the waves occasionally echoed off the cave walls. Thanks to the cool breeze of late spring, it wasn't too cold or hot even after sitting for a long time. It was a fortunate thing. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 115. I was sitting by the campfire, trying to manifest red mana while spirits carrying materials for the hut construction milled around behind me. Manifested beside the fire, Merylda swung her legs and marveled with exclamations of awe. Unlike the usual mana, the sensation within was much heavier and more challenging to maneuver. Star position magic was the most profound and least researched area among all magic domains. This type of magic was particularly specialized in twisting and bending the principles or laws of the world, dealing mainly with time and space. It can also be used to manipulate or bewilder the opponent's perception forcefully. Reach the realm of high-level magic, and one might even control another's mind or execute massive spatial movements. The potency of the spells was staggering to the point of questioning their legitimacy. It sounds impressive, but that comes with its own set of penalties. Firstly, star position mana efficiency isn't all that great, and with less research in this field, mastering the magic comes with many trials and errors. Moreover, it could be quite taxing on the body, I've heard. Originally, star position magic was not considered as a playable skill even in Sylvania's Failed Swordsman. It was positioned as an exclusive skill performed by enemies or named NPCs. They look complicated to use. Could you get the hang of controlling the flow of mana? Well, I'll have to give it a try. I glanced at the manuscript of Introduction to Star Position Magic, by Gluck, carefully laid by the campfire side. It was after skimming through this book that the basics of star position magic became unlocked. I was fully aware of the hidden growth elements, yet I had never imagined a player could learn star position magic. Never could I have guessed that the method would involve discovering Gluck's grave hidden in the western coastal areas. The coastal regions of Akan Island, particularly the small crevice in the cliffside, had little significance in the scenario and were nearly imperceptible, even up close. Nobody would have imagined such a space existing if it wasn't for Lucy. Rather than repetitive mastery, comprehending the principles themselves is critical. Magic is a discipline coexisting with theory and sensation, but star position magic feels heavily skewed towards theory. While I read the book cross-legged on a log, Lucy silently appeared and settled on my lap. Buried in my embrace, she casually manifested star position mana in her hand. Although it was a random manifestation, the volume of the swirling star position mana appeared immense. Swoosh. As Lucy clenched her fist, the scattered junk around, ranging from hunting tools and trap materials to construction supplies, began to congregate around the focal point of the mana manifestation. Forced agglomeration, one of the more difficult star position spells, can twist the flow of space to modify the opponent's position at will. Of course, a feel for manifesting star position mana itself needs repetitive mastery. So, Lucy, you've also undergone repetitive training. I just tried it a couple of times, and it worked. So it would seem. I tried to manifest star position magic a few more times but ended up refraining. Considering the long term, this was a magic that I must master, but it was quite tricky to make rapid progress with it. After all, star position magic remains an enigmatic domain. Just handling star position mana was enough to amaze the faculty. If lucky, I might receive more concrete instructions from a professor who took an interest. Lucy typically relies on innate talent and sensation for her magic, making it hard to learn or imitate. It might be better to receive help from a professor with extensive teaching experience. There isn't necessarily a correlation between magical talent and the ability to teach it. The thought of the late Professor Gluck made me feel a pang of regret. There might have been no one better suited to teach star position magic. I guess I'll have to start by absorbing everything in this book. As I read Gluck's introductory text, I refocused my resolve. The book clearly demonstrated his exceptional understanding of star position magic and was quite digestible. Not to say it wasn't complex. Clenching my teeth and racking my brain, I could still manage to glean something from it. Experience has taught me that no matter how complex the manual, if you read it 10, 20 times with determination, it becomes ingrained to some extent. The same goes for technical books or legal codes. If you keep reading them over and over, you eventually come to understand them. Since this is a discipline where theory is more critical than sensation, I'll focus on reading this book after my duties are done and before sleep. One must not waste the precious asset that is star position magic. Yawn tilde. Lucy, perhaps feeling sleepy again, let out a big yawn and quietly stared at me, her eyes half open. She snuggled within my embrace, wriggling slightly to find the most comfortable position, then without any reason at all, swallowed her saliva. While I casually turned the pages of the book with one hand, I absent-mindedly stroked Lucy's head. By now, it had become a natural act. Though suddenly, for some mysterious reason, she shuddered and stealthily glanced up at my expression before abruptly pushing herself off my chest to stand up. "What's wrong?" Flushed, Lucy avoided my gaze, insisting it was nothing, and then buried herself back into my embrace, rubbing her cheek against me to find the best position. "This is difficult." Sigh. Merylda, sitting beside us, was aimlessly playing with the tips of her hair. Again, the number of girls has increased. It was finally the weekend. With plenty of food and no maintenance tasks, I spent the late night hours engrossed in the star position magic tome. Zix, carrying an enormous bundle, emerged in the camp and took in the sight of Merylda perusing art books beside me, thus turning visibly pale. "Oh, Zix, what brings you here? Sared, if I may be so bold, even if you think it's presumptuous, may I speak freely? What's going on? Even for a male's ambition, isn't it important to think about what's manageable? Isn't this too much? Can you predict what kind of hell might unfold?" Quote. I glared at Zix with narrowed eyes, then cut off the mana powering Merylda's manifestation. Immediately, her form became translucent and began to dissipate into the wind. Hey, I was in the middle of reading something interesting. Closing square bracket. The book that Merylda had been reading rolled onto the ground, utterly abandoned. Quote. I apologize. It was a spirit. I jumped to conclusions. I sincerely apologize. It's become a habit for me to think this way. The truth is, Zix had seen Merylda before, during a duel exchange. It seems his words burst out in a moment of shock and confusion. It's understandable. The current form of Merylda was the result of minimizing mana efficiency for manifestation's sake, though burdensome for my mana management. Yet, consistently practicing manifestation also served as training in spirit sensitivity, simultaneously improving Merylda's comprehension. Naturally, daily life would be somewhat inconvenient. It's like training by wearing sandbags as a matter of routine. Only through such enduring practices could I make full use of Merelda in actual combat. After some silence, mana burst forth from the void, and a gust of wind swept through. Whoosh! Once more, Merelda's human shape burst forth. This time it was no longer powered by my mana, but rather through Lucis, which was as limitless as a wellspring. Both Lucy and Yenica had a level of sensitivity that was entirely on a different plane compared to an ordinary person. Unless in a complete wolf form, manifesting a human shape optimized for mana efficiency was as effortless as breathing to them. Indeed, Lucy, sleeping in my arms, showed no sign of being affected. While the combat capabilities would be significantly weakened, since Merelda's primary goal was simply to read, there was no issue. If you're going to deactivate it, at least give me a warning. Closing square bracket. Merelda picked up her book, clearly annoyed, and swiftly started flipping through the pages to find where she had left off. Zix watched the scene quietly, shaking his head. My camp had become quite lively recently, making this degree of commotion hardly noteworthy. Anyway, Sir Ed, here are some monster ecology books that I've been collecting, as well as some discarded books requested by Elka. They said you can use them however you like. Oh, that's great. I'll sort them out, so just throw them anywhere inside the hut. Actually, they're already sorted. Though Elka might not seem like a librarian, she can't stand seeing books scattered all around. So she has arranged them all categorically. Zix brought about 6 bundles of books, apparently sorted and divided by each field. The books stored in the student library for a long time or frequently borrowed tend to wear out and damage often. In such cases, new books are ordered to replace the old ones, and the severely damaged ones are discarded. Especially if pages are missing or covers are damaged. When I asked Elka if all these could be passed on to me, Elka agreed readily. I was truly grateful. I used to be quite reluctant to spend money, instead borrowing every book from the library, so this was indeed a cause for celebration. You look like you've been through a lot carrying these books here. Not at all. Even if it wasn't for the books, I would have still been lifting and running with something else. Recently, simple jogging doesn't seem like much of an exercise. Zix simply placed the pile of books inside the hut, wiping off his sweat before sitting across the campfire. Naturally, his gaze shifted to Lucy, who was asleep and snuggled in my arms. She was softly breathing with occasional rubs against her cheeks, yet she kept a firm grip on her witch hat so it wouldn't fall off. Actually, I had other things to tell you along with the delivery of the books. What's that? Have you heard that I've joined the student council? My fingers, which had been flipping through the book pages, stalled for a moment. I paused to listen to Zix. Observing their reactions, Zix Effelstein seamlessly continued the conversation, already predicting their responses. Tanya Rothtailor's cabinet seems to be receiving favorable reviews from the sophomores and juniors as well, are you not aware? I understand that you're completely absorbed with your classes, but... Yes, I've often heard that there is no significant opposition to Tanya, and that she's smoothly becoming the omnipotent student council president. It is rather awkward, but it seems that the president, no, Tanya values me quite a bit. It was inevitable. Zix Effelstein was the one who, even in a situation where everyone turned against Tanya, relied solely on his instincts and sided with her. Those who receive help in times of crisis make for reliable allies. Now that Tanya is starting to wield her power as the student council president, she is cautiously choosing whom to trust with tasks. In the scenario of Sylvania's failed swordsman, there was no mention of Zix joining the student council. Until his very exit, he remained unaffiliated, and his actions were mostly motivated by his love for his partner, Elka. That's how the story began to slowly diverge. So she instructed me, since it's come to this, it would be better to secure a place for senior ed in the student council as well, and told me to ask for your opinion. Is it fine to form a cabinet in such a haphazard way? It's not done carelessly. However, it seems the president trusts you the most, senior ed. I mean, she looks like she'd nod at anything you say. No joke. From Tanya's perspective, having some leeway in forming her cabinet means she's shaping it to her own liking. It seems my name has come up in the process. The student council members are already quite formidable. It's the first time in Sylvania's history that a freshman has become the president, but there are already plenty of upperclassmen involved. The chief secretary is the daughter of Count Curl from the junior class, and the chief executive officer is Senior Dex, the top student of the senior class. Zix shook his hands a few times, then tossed some logs into the campfire, continuing his speech. The plan is to bring over Senior Anise, who's famous as the top assistant from the junior class, and Joseph Whitepelts, who's the freshman magic department leader and a researcher at the Tog Academy, is nearly persuaded. His kin, Senior Dorothy Whitepelts from the 4th year, has already come over. If we get the Whitepelts siblings, we're looking at one of the most impressive cabinets in history. I could already guess where the selection process was heading. Anise Halen, due to tuition issues, wouldn't abandon her assistant position, therefore she would likely decline the student council offer. Joseph would not join just for the council's extra points or privileges, he's more interested in money itself. Nevertheless, I could not deny that the members assembled were more prominent than expected. And I'm unfamiliar with the notion that Tanya Rothtaylor is leading the charge at the forefront. The president is swamped with council work in her office at Obel Hall, unable to leave. So as a proxy, I came to inquire in my capacity as a council executive. You seem to be having quite a tough time, Zix. It's nothing much, really. So, are you declining then? Zix knew my answer even as he asked the question. Yes, even nowadays, I'm living my life split down to the hour. I'm busy, though not as much as before. I attend all the academy classes and cross in and out of Assistant Professor Claire's lab as a scholarship student, while also continuing my personal training. I have to plan for the training in spirit magic, demonology, and now holy magic. Taking on a student council position would be too much to handle. I suppose the president will be disappointed. Though, she knew you wouldn't be easy to recruit. By the way, do you use formal speech with Tanya? Yes, well, everyone does. It might feel strange because it's the first time we've had a freshman as president, but still, we have to acknowledge her power and dignity. As Zix casually stirred the campfire with a poker, the conversation continued lightly. In any case, your sister's authority is growing day by day. As family, you must be proud. Still, I feel rather strange. Strange how? What could be strange? It just feels like someone has orchestrated this situation. It may look like the current student council president is thriving, but I have an intuition that there's a hidden backer behind all this. Zix was a boy with a natural instinct for such things. He trusted his intuition more than any situational evidence, and it was a frighteningly accurate sense. Upon hearing that, I couldn't help but think of another girl. At the Sylvania branch of Elk Trading Company, sitting in her private office, a girl manipulated her quill. Her soft gaze seemed etched into my mind. Only she knew the scope of the picture she was painting. Well, it's not like I can do anything about these hunches. Zix said dismissively and tossed the poker back into the fire. Anyway, we're in for a busy period again. According to the Academy's calendar, it's time for the joint combat practice, and this week the Holy Sovereign of the capital is visiting Sylvania. He plans to baptize a few representatives and deliver a speech. Looks like it'll be hectic. Zix's words gave clues. They more or less signified where we were in the narrative. Yet, as the scenario had started to deviate, my prior knowledge of the future was becoming increasingly inaccurate. Nevertheless, I could still speculate on what might happen next based on the main course of events that remained constant. Joint combat practice. Freshmen would spar with sophomores, and juniors with seniors. It was a traditional event and practice lesson. The main characters are sophomores, which means they'll be facing the freshmen. This combat practice is not a pairing system but a challenge one, Tylee, Clevius, and I have already received numerous challenges. I could dodge them, but I couldn't help but accept because the new juniors are too eager. I didn't know you had that side. I do adopt a firm stance when necessary. I hear the freshmen are competing amongst themselves since there's no A division, each trying to figure out who'll rise to A class first. Probably, they think beating me, a second-year A student, would be their shortcut. That's not the best approach. Zix Effelstein is one of the top students among the second-year A class in terms of power and practical sense. If it hadn't been for Lucy Mayrill, who was considered exceptional, he would have taken the top magician post, so challenging him isn't the wisest move. But audacity is also a symbol of passion, so they can't be blamed. Even Zix would get tired if he faced everyone, but that wasn't going to happen. Act 3, Scene 5. The second joint combat practice before the Lucy subjugation, the final battle of Act 3. For the protagonists who had become seniors, they would face this event one last time, and it wouldn't end pleasantly. Claude, the top of the first-year alchemy department, would ultimately lose the last duel. Swallowed up by anger and humiliated pride, he'd drink the forbidden potion, blood of the evil god, and that would be the start of another major incident. That's the history I knew. However, at this point, there were no guarantees it would unfold in the same way. By now, I've stopped expecting it to go as foreseen. While the big picture should remain the same, there will surely be other deviations. The flow has already twisted so much that only by watching can we know what's to come. Whether the future unfolds as I know, or it diverges entirely, it's out of my hands. The course of history was, bit by bit, shifting into uncharted territory. Wow, amazing. The next morning, at the crack of dawn, Yenica hurried out of Dex Hall to Ed's camp, and she couldn't help but marvel at the neatly built hut. It was constructed right across from Ed's hut, separated by the campfire. The building, planned to take roughly 2 weeks, was instead eagerly completed by the spirits in just 1 week. Their furnishings and Yenica's personal belongings were already inside, making it feasible for her to submit her withdrawal notice to Dex Hall. This unworthy muck, unworthy muck, Bye. However, the scene near the hut was quite pitiable. Dozens of lower spirits lay scattered on the ground, their faces carrying a near-death expression. It seemed they only realized they had worked overnight as the moist dawn air embraced them, the rising sun in the east likely hinting at their long shift. Guys, I didn't expect you to go this far, I told you to take it easy. Muck, sprawled on the ground among the other spirits, spoke in a lively tone. No, actually it was Tarkhan who, no, never mind. We are now ready, for spiritual transcendence, please, enjoy your time at the camp, that's all we need, that's enough, for us. Closing square bracket. With that, the spirits one by one began to fade as their presence dissipated. It was merely their presence being dispelled, but as it happened at sunrise, it looked as if they were ascending to heaven. Yenica, clutching her oak staff, struggled to hold back tears as she bid them farewell. Thank you, guys. Really, thank you. To an outsider, the scene would have looked like a farewell party. Once this brief exchange ended, Yenica sat at the campfire site in the middle, clenching her fists. It was finally the weekend. She could spend the whole day in the camp. The plan was to inspect the newly finished hut and to move over more miscellaneous items, but first, she thought of cooking breakfast. She imagined Ed waking up to find her with stew prepared over the campfire and couldn't wait to see his reaction. Living together. Yenica spoke the word out loud while perched on a dewy log, and ashamed of her own outspoken thoughts, she kicked at the dirt and swung her oak staff at the air. Technically, she hadn't fully quit yet, so she was merely spending the day with him for the weekend. Still, the present moment felt like a dream, and her face involuntarily flushed red. Then she repeatedly muttered, living together, practicing the word several times before punching the air again. Just as she thought, I should be cooking something instead of this. Bang! Ed's hut door flung open. Was it Ed? Surprised, Yenica brushed off her skirt and turned around to find Lucy standing there, dazed and unsteady. Quote ellipsis quote. The unkempt outfit, the drool stain at the corner of her mouth, and her hair sticking out in all directions. It was obvious Lucy had just woken up inside Ed's hut. While Yenica was privately relishing the idea of living together, Lucy had actually spent the night. After a brief eye contact, Lucy stood silently for a while with a vacant look, then, with her hands on her hips, she let out a faint laugh. Lucy then closed the hut door, stretched cutely, and swiftly left the camp. Alone, Yenica sat there hardened like a stone next to the fire, her mouth agape. Speechless, she remained seated in a daze.